So welcome to the chat. Today I'm going to be talking about backyard ultras. So I hope that you're here for that. So I'm excited to talk about backyard ultras because they're one of my favorite things in the world in terms of running events. And I want to talk to you about why that is. So firstly, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what a backyard ultra is in the first place, in case you haven't heard of it. So a backyard ultra is 6.7 kilometer laps, basically, and that you just keep running those on the hour until you cannot make the start line to the next one or you choose not to continue. So it's a pretty cool format. And yeah, it's very unique because really there's no finish line apart from the one that you reach when you can't or won't continue. So yeah, pretty interesting. And this makes for very interesting racing. So there's no set distance goal. You've got no idea how long you're going to actually be running for once you start. And everyone has to run the same lap in the same period of time. You can go as fast or as slow as you like, as long as you're ready for the start line the next the next lap. So yeah, so pretty unique format. And it's very much a mental battle as much as a physical one, because in most other formats you have something interesting to look at, like a new piece of scenery. You've got aid stations along the way and different things like that. But whereas in this format, it's one thing, and that's just run one lap, 6.7K, get to the start where you started and less than an hour ago, get ready for the next lap and do it again. So mentally, that's a little bit to get your head around for a lot of people. And I love this because fitness becomes a less part of the equation. Obviously, if you're fitter, you can get around the laps a bit quicker. But once you get to a certain point, it becomes much more of a mental game than just a fitness game. So yeah, so what's my experiences? So I've run two backyard ultras so far. And the first one I did was Garden City, which is in Toowoomba. And I didn't know what to expect. I actually made it a bit more interesting for myself by wearing a weight vest as well. And the thing that was interesting about it was that there's actually 100 meters-ish, maybe like 90 something meters of elevation gain per lap, which does add up when you're talking about running over 20 laps, for example. Plus the heat of the day, there was some heat, right? So that made it also quite challenging because, it was October, so it wasn't crazy hot like it can be in Queensland, but it was still hot enough that it was a factor that you had to weigh in. And yeah, also running with a weight vest. And the good thing about the Toowoomba one compared to the second one that I did was that it started in the morning. So I think it started at 6 a.m. Could be wrong, could have been start at 7. But so we're running for the majority of the day. And so it wasn't until 12 hours in that we actually hit the night. And that meant that there was a lot of other people to run with and chat with, and it was kind of like a fun, easy long run. But then once we hit the night, that's when it becomes like a different beast, because at that point in this race, a lot of people had started to drop out. And so less people running. And also what I find in the two backyard ultras I've done so far is that at nighttime, people are less chatty. So it's a bit less sociable. And then that becomes more of a mental game, because if you've got less people to talk to and distract you, then you've got to go internal and yeah, keep your mind entertained so that you can just keep running. So that was what was interesting. And I definitely found when it come to about midnight and on, maybe 1 or 2 a.m., when we've been running for, I guess, what's that, 19 to 20 hours, that's when I started to really feel the fatigue. And yeah, that's when you start to face the demons. And that's what I love. I really love that part of the race where gets interesting. That's when you start to really kind of get to know where your limits are. So yeah, that was really cool. And I definitely did find my limit. So this little video is a video of me finishing this race. So this is me finishing that race. That's that's what I look like after 20 odd laps of the running. So yeah, just a bit of insight into how your body goes when you've been running for that long. So backyard ultras are actually going pretty nuts. They're getting really, really popular. So this is a little video of the start of the Toowoomba one. And you can see there's a lot of people out there just going for a nice easy jog, around the Toowoomba Showground. It's interesting, like it started back in, what was it, 2011 in Big's backyard in the US by Lazarus Lake, who's also well known for the, what do you call them, Barkley marathons. But I think there's a real appeal to them because they're so accessible. And that's why I want to talk about them. Because I think that a lot of people, when they get into running, are thinking about running events like your 10Ks and your park runs and marathons and all of those things. But, you know, they're fine. And like, obviously, those things are getting really popular. But these are kind of a little bit low key, right? And, if you've ever done a park run, you'll notice that they're very sort of community oriented and very friendly and accessible. And I think that the backyard ultras are the same. So I would really say, like, if you're looking at getting into running and you want to do a really low key, low pressure, enjoyable running event, and you can run as far as you want, and you can have snacks every hour, and there's no pressure to run a certain pace. These are a really great way of doing that. And what's good about being able to stop every hour is you can change your shoes, you can test different equipment, you can test different fuels. There's so much you can do, which makes them so much more fun. So you can set personal records. And, in the Toowoomba one that I ran, I met cyclists who were not runners at all. And they were having a great time because they're like, I want to run 100K. And, they're not even ultra runners. They don't run long distances, but they cycled a lot. And they're like, I think I can do it. And they actually did, two or three guys who were there for the first ever ultra run that they've ever done. They ran 100K. And I was super impressed. But it's actually easier to run further than you've ever run before in this format because you're forced to slow down, and you may as well, pay attention to what you're eating and do all the things that you should do in other race formats where you might not because you're not paying attention. So that's why I think they're so good. And even if you wanted to do a 50K race or other styles of events like ultra runs and or even trail runs or even just a road marathon or whatever it might be, this is such a good way of like seeing where your body is good and where your body or your mind is not good. So that's why I love it. And yeah, it's good for both elites and beginners alike. So I think that's awesome. So rules of a backyard ultra. So this one, for example, is a picture of the board, glass house standing. And this is what usually is the setup, is you'll get these boards with tokens for each runner. In the glass house standing, it was horseshoes. At Toowoomba, it was windmills. I haven't done any other events, so I don't know what they are. I'm sure other people will be able to say. But yeah, there's various tokens. And basically, when you finish and you decide to pull out or you can't continue or you get timed out, then you take your token off the board and you're out. And you get, as it says on there, you get whistles or some kind of warning every lap before the time starts for that lap. So 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and then you must be in the starting area to continue. You can do whatever you want to get around the course within the hour. You don't have to run if you can walk fast enough. And I have heard of a guy that managed to walk 100K in a backyard ultra. So, that's entirely an option. Yeah, it's up to you what you do. And if you finish early, you can get whatever, support you want. You can have support crew there, you can have a whole tent, you can have food, all these different things. And yeah, so it's very, very nice to be able to get that refreshment. But what you'll find is that, over time, the rest feels like less and less. But there's no finish line apart from when you decide not to continue, or you can't continue because you don't make it back in time for the next lap. The 6.7K loop is designed because you'll end up running 100 miles if you do 24 loops. So that's how it works. And yeah, the lap distance is something that most people can comfortably do within an hour. And so, even if you're a new runner, you can probably do 2 or 3 laps quite comfortably, which for a lot of people, that would still even be a PB, 22K. So that's what's really cool about it. And, what's really interesting is it tests people. I've met people who are really strong runners who've run these events and found them to be really challenging. And not because it's physically challenging, but because it's mentally challenging, because they're forced to slow down and there's nothing to aim for apart from just getting around and starting again. So it can be very mentally challenging, and that's another reason that I love it. And yeah, you're not really racing other people. And that's another thing that's so good about them is that you actually would want to encourage the people running with you and like chat to them and go, come on, let's go. We can keep going. Because the more people who are still in the race, the easier it is to stay in. When it gets to the later laps and people are dropping out and there's less people to talk to, and it's harder to keep yourself as motivated. But that obviously it becomes an interesting test. So that's what's really cool. And then there's a lot of strategy behind them as well. So pacing your like figuring out like the right lap pace to run, because obviously it's very easy to run those paces at the start, but you don't want to run too fast because if you do, then you could end up having some problems, you know? You're getting your fueling right, getting hydration in. Yep, I could talk about that and we'll talk about that later, and getting the right amount of recovery. You know, if you actually are fortunate enough to get to the point where you need sleep because you've been going for 24, 48 plus hours, then sleeping and recovery becomes really, really critical as well. So yeah, so there's lots of them popping up. They actually introduced the satellite championships. I think last year might have been the first one. And then so they've got the world championships, which are the highest placed people from the satellite championships are going to the world championships this year, which is really interesting as well. And we've got some really good ones. There's heaps and heaps of them showing up in Australia now. So just in the last year, so 2023 to 24 was the first time Glasshouse Standing on the Sunshine Coast was run. 2024 last year, Toowoomba, the first time it had run. Some of these other ones like Dead Cow Gully, Birdie's Backyard, Sydney's. Sydney's, I think, relatively newer. Herdy's is, well, I think, one of the ones, I think it got bigger in 2021 with what I read. But it's got some really good ones. And Dead Cow Gully got quite well known because they had the Masters Championships there, and Phil Gore, Harvey Lewis, and Sam Harvey were running head to head, and they set the world record for the time at 101 laps. So there's a really good documentary on YouTube about that, which if you get interested in this format, I would definitely encourage you to check out because it gives you some really interesting insights about what it's like to be in a race for that long. And they had the satellite championships at Herdy's front yard. And so if you're confused about like what's backyard versus front yard is more in the city, in the CBD, whereas backyard is usually more in the bush. So, but yeah, but Australia did really well at Herdy's. We actually scored second in the world behind Belgium, from what I can tell. So we've done really well, and that's primarily thanks to people like Phil Gore and Ryan Crawford who ran really well at that race. So yeah, it's good. Shows our grit. So yeah, I had some fun things to talk about, and the first thing I wanted to mention is the types of runners that will potentially show up at a backyard ultra and what their challenges might be. So let's talk about new runners. So first time long distance runners. So who are these people? You may have never run more than a half marathon before, maybe even more than a 10K. But, potentially thanks to talks like this, you may be drawn to the backyard ultra format because it's so accessible and approachable. So what challenges would you face as a new runner? One is underestimating the potential total distance because you can potentially end up running a long way, but you may find that you build up fatigue quicker than you anticipated. So that's one aspect, is that you're going to be running a long way compared to what you're used to. Lack of experience with nutrition and hydration, that's probably the most likely area because those things like heat management, nutrition, and hydration, in particular in Australia, they're the most important things that you need to get right in order to be able to continue running and physically staying well, So you need to actually come to the race with a strategy to be able to get that under control. Because if you're just having a gel every hour, you might find very quickly that that's not actually enough. You actually need to have some real food. And also, the time may become an issue finishing the laps in time if you're a relatively inexperienced runner and not confident on pacing yourself. Then you've also got the mental barriers. It's like, especially, considering that this would be a longer run than you've probably ever done, you may start finding you're getting some mental challenges, like you may get more pain in your legs than you've ever experienced before, and things like that. So that would definitely be something that would be an issue. So so advice on how you might overcome some of these challenges as a new runner is, yeah, just, trust the format and, just engage in the process and not worry so much about, totals or outcome based, thinking. Just run one lap at a time. And I think that that's the right approach for anybody in these events, because that's all you really can focus on is one lap at a time. And definitely, I think if you're a new runner coming into this, really practice your fueling and make sure you plan a fueling strategy and practice it before you run. And then, yeah, change your mindset. So always think, I only need to do one more lap, and that would be your mantra for the whole run. So that's for a new runner. So then what else would we have? We might have a regular runner, like a park runner, someone who's used to running 5 or 10K on a regular basis, and maybe has done a half marathon, for example, something like that. And may have these people probably got strong running habits and comfortable running, those distances regularly, but they're not necessarily built for endurance or haven't tried endurance running before. And often, for example, I know in parkrun, people tend to race a lot. So they may be somebody who is used to racing shorter distances and so hasn't worked out how to slow down and conserve energy. So yeah, challenges might be pacing, really learning how to slow down and just run nice and easy for that distance. And again, we're starting to get to these endurance distances where it starts to be a pain in the legs. And getting outside of your physical comfort zone, especially from an endurance perspective, that could definitely be something that would happen. And yeah, that can be there's that mental challenge again of running slowly and, just going, oh, this can go forever. That can be a big mental challenge. So these are all things that you might face as a new park runner. And I would say the same thing applies with nutrition too. So in terms of how to approach this, if you're one of these types of people, train at an easy pace. I would say it's important. Learn how to slow down and get used to running the format of running 6.7K in, say, 45 minutes or 50 minutes, and what that feels like, and then having a rest and maybe doing it again. So if you're ever going to do one of these events, I would say practicing that format of running is actually really valuable. So, because it's really not about finishing a lap quickly. That is not a goal. And we want to make sure that we're actually building endurance. So building the amount of volume you're running each week is a recommended training approach. I think that's Sydney's backyard. I can't remember where I got all these photos from. Marathon runners are the next group of people. So these are people who have started to run longer distances and potentially more experienced runners and people who are capable of running for several hours and understand a bit about fueling and pacing for a marathon. But even so, a backyard ultra is still a big different challenge, right? So things that they'll have to adjust to is, again, not knowing when the finish line is. So you don't, ideally don't really want to come into one of these races with a goal, You don't want to say, I'm going to run 50K, you can, but I would recommend, not having a target finish time, because that's when you're going to find out the most about yourself and what you can actually do when you don't set a goal. And that can be a challenge to not knowing what you're actually going to do. And the start-stop format, I think this is challenging for especially more experienced runners who are used to running continuously for a long time. So having to stop for 10 minutes or 15 minutes and then go and start again can be quite challenging because, our muscles can cool down and then we have to get them going again. So that's actually quite an interesting challenge. And also fueling for a long-term effort. So, a marathon runner would often be used to using gel to fuel because, usually a marathon might be up to sort of 6 hours, usually maybe 3 to 6 hours, depending on your pace. And for a lot of people, you can get through that using gels. But as you start to go for longer and longer, you'll find that that quickly becomes unsustainable and your palate won't enjoy that and you're going to not want to eat them anymore. So you want to start getting used to training with solid foods and different foods, having support crews that actually supply you with different types of foods is a real win in these types of events. So those are the things that marathon runners probably face as a challenge. And so things that they would want to focus on is like mentally reframing, not thinking about it in terms of distance, again, just thinking about one lap at a time, using active recovery potentially to try and keep the muscles relatively warmer, not getting so cold. Maybe something worth looking at, what you often see with the good guys is they've got someone rubbing their legs down, putting deep heat on, doing some rolling techniques and things like that to keep the muscle a bit warmer. And also, yeah, using that fueling strategy from the start. I think that's probably an important part of it. So yeah, so that's marathon runners. And then predictably, what have we got next? Ultra runners. So people like myself, when I first did my first backyard, I'd already done, 100K event and 100-mile event and different things like that. So I'm used to running a long way, but I'm used to normally running a long way in one go. So I'm just going to go start to finish with some aid stations along the way. But, it's basically, I'm just going to keep running. So the challenges that someone like myself, when you are going into a backyard ultra might face is that not having a finish line can be very like mentally challenging again, because you're like, well, I don't have an aid station to aim for. I don't have a finish line to aim for. I'm just going to run. So it's again, like the mindset is so different, which I think that makes it really interesting. And again, that frequent break in your running, that can be quite challenging too. So that's where actually going slower at the start is a really good idea, because you don't have as long a break and you don't really need one. So you can do more walking. And so I think actually from my experience now, walk running is actually really important. And I have done that, but I think I got carried away in the second one that I did the glass house standing and ran more than I should have. And my legs packed it in again, surprisingly. So that kind of strategy is important. So not pushing the pace and like trying to run at the front of the race is actually very smart. And sometimes as a long distance runner, that if you're a competitive person, you've got to kind of put your ego in check and make sure you slow down. So that's actually important. And how do we overcome these challenges? Again, thinking small term goals, short term, not long term, is really important. So looking at the next hour or 3 hours if you want to, developing a routine, keeping yourself hydrated, fueled, limber and mentally on point is really valuable. And, keeping to your pre-race plan and not getting carried away during the race by following other people's plans or, those types of things. That's what often puts people makes people not hit their goals, because they start following other people's plans. So I would say making sure that you do follow your own plan and stick to that is important. And that applies to all races, not just these races. So yeah, so now we've talked about the other types of runners. Let's have a look at some of the key challenges and how we can make sure we overcome them. So firstly, we're going to talk about pacing and energy management. So this is a really important piece. And this, all of these things apply to all races, whether you're running marathons, whether you're running ultra marathons, or you're running backyard, you always want to make sure you get your pacing right. Okay. So making sure that you're not going too hard, because it's very easy in a race situation to get caught up with the adrenaline and the atmosphere and other people, and thinking other people who know what they're doing, and maybe they don't know what they're doing. And you don't find out until way later, and you've been doing the same thing, that they made a mistake and you followed and made the same mistake. So you want to make sure you get your pacing right. And when we're talking about a backyard ultra, you probably don't want to run faster than say like a 52-minute lap to start with, because there's no need to, like in your first lap, if you're running faster than 52 minutes, what are you going to do? Just sit around and go, well, that was fun. You're going to put more fatigue into your legs than you needed to. And yeah, it's not a pissing contest, So really slowing down and getting yourself used to running slower and doing walk breaks is actually really important. And heat management in Australia is actually also really important. Walking in the shade, walking uphill sections, really doing everything you can to conserve energy, reduce your core temperature is going to be really valuable. And as we said here, pacing the first 12 hours, will be a big determinant of how well you can continue. Potentially 24 hours might be a goal, but even beyond that. So that would be one point is pacing. Then we're talking about fueling and hydration. So there's a lot of things to take into account here, and I haven't gotten this right yet. And so that's probably my biggest focus for my races going forward is getting this bit right. But I think this is important, and this is where it's a good place to practice because you can, in a race where there's not as many aid stations, and you can't just grab whatever you want every hour. There's less opportunity to practice, but things that we can make mistakes are not eating enough at the start. So then we're trying to catch up later because we haven't, kept the fuel in. Using very simple race fuels that people might used to be using in marathons, like gels and simple sugars, that can cause stomach distress and, be unpalatable. And, we do want to have probably a bit more because it makes us less hungry later on too. Keeping the sodium and electrolytes going in is really important because if you don't have enough sodium going in, then you're going to be prone to cramps and there's going to be hydration issues later as well. And on the flip side, we don't want to overdo, protein or fat because those things are not really like sustainable. They're not fuel sources for running, although they are useful to have when you're running a long time. You don't want to have too much of them. So small amounts of protein and fat are good, but not too much. So I've often used liquid nutrition. I use Infinite Nutrition primarily, and I found that to be very good. But I also have found that after about 10 hours of that, I'm kind of starting to not be able to stomach as much of that. So having the variety is also really valuable. So having, sweet and savory options and having the variety of different things that you can have is gonna be more sustainable. The downside for me that I've had is that in the previous races I've done, I didn't have a crew, so I didn't have people there to cook real food and give me hot food or things like that, which I think can make a big difference based on what I've heard from other people. So that's a goal for me. I'm doing Dead Cow Gully next, so I know other guys who are racing there with crews, so I think that will hopefully be something that can help me in that race. And yeah, making sure you're planning to have plenty of carbohydrates every hour. This is a standard for all endurance running. You know, in a shorter distance, like a half marathon, you don't necessarily need to go for 60 grams of carbs an hour. Even a marathon, you can get away with a bit less. But when you're talking about ultra marathons and running long term, you want to go for upwards of 60 grams of carbs an hour. And you want to plan how you're going to get that, you know? And yeah, having the variety of textures and palatable options is going to be important. So having a variety of options, and yeah, there are some notes here about protein and fats. We want a small amount of protein every few hours just to help with the muscle recovery if we're going to be running for a long time. And we want to have a few sources of proteins and fats. Nut butters can be good, and meats and recovery shakes can be potentially helpful. And so these are things that we can have in small doses that can kind of have that variety and keep our stomach feeling a bit full, but we don't want to overdo it. Okay. So, and then we also want to make sure we get the electrolytes in. So if you don't have electrolytes in your drink, then you would have salt tablets, right? That keep the sodium going in. But you need to make sure you've got something and always make sure you continually eating. Don't wait until you get hungry or you get thirsty. On the flip side, don't overdrink, but yeah, you want to kind of find a balance. So, and then you've got the mental strategies as well. How do you survive this mentally? And this is what I find the most interesting is because assuming that you can kind of conquer the basic physical things which are necessary, then the mental game is what makes it the most interesting because you can struggle with motivation, because you're just like, well, what's the point? I'm just going to go another lap. And and if you're not used to getting these mental loads that you can often get when you're running long distance races, then you might think that's it, I'm done. I've hit this mental low, I'm not getting out of it. But when you've run enough of these things, you realize that you've only got to ride it out. The highs and lows, none of them are permanent. They will just come and go. And your body actually, goes in waves too. So what feels really hard one lap will actually feel easier the next lap. And so that's something that you have to get used to through experience and will actually make it something that's more enjoyable long term. Being able to push through those, it's a really rewarding experience. Well, and yeah, also other runners, they can really disrupt your race, you know? Like you can get sucked into other people's thought processes and other people's like approaches and strategies. And if you get sucked into doing what other people are doing, you'll end up, not doing what you should be doing. So that's something to be aware of. And, in any running event, you want to stick to your plan. And if you notice that other people are doing something different, you just go, okay, they're doing something different and not get sucked into doing that, you know? So some tips in terms of technique, focusing on the next lap. That's it. Using a mantra and breathing a technique to keep yourself focused and relaxed. And, breaking the lap into segments. I've definitely found myself naturally doing this in the laps that I've done at Toowoomba and Glasshouse. You naturally go, oh, this is this section, this is this section. And usually you find that they have like 3 or 4 sections for each lap. And I could tell you in detail what those sections were in both races because obviously when you've run them a few times, they become very familiar. But you will find that that happens and it makes the laps feel much quicker, which is cool. And it's just like a bit of like Groundhog Day in the end. Every time you go into these things, you want to have a plan. Yeah. And then when last thing we can look at is like sleep and recovery. There can be that stiffness that happens, especially after you've been running a while, your muscles start to get tighter and it can start to be harder to start again. And then the sleep can be an issue as well. So potentially, like if you don't need sleep, getting some light activity or getting someone to rub down your legs can help keep the muscles warm. The fatigue side of things, you do want to try and plan for having micro naps, especially if you're looking at going over 24 hours. And I noticed in the last one I did that I did get like a little micro nap, which was quite helpful. But yeah, I would like to be able to go further and try more, and caffeine and things like little stimulants can make a big difference. So using caffeine strategically can be really valuable too. So yeah, and then having a crew who can run through a checklist so you don't have to think, I think can be really valuable. That not that I've had that experience because I haven't had a crew when I've done it. So yeah, okay. Moving on. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of the backyard ultras that I know about in Australia and the details of those and what their characteristics are and how this might play a role in how you're going to approach the race based on what race it is. So Dead Cow is probably one of the ones that I first heard of because of the world record and because it's relatively local to me. So this one's in west of here in Nanango in Queensland. I'm on the Sunshine Coast. It's in actually this year it's in June. Sometimes it's in May. I guess they might have moved it. But yeah, I gather that the days are relatively warmer, which is pretty typical for Queensland, but the nights are cooler. So that makes it really interesting. You know, winter in Queensland, it's somewhat humid, but not crazy humid, but you still make sure you have to plan your hydration, especially if you're coming from interstate when you're not used to Queensland weather. And characteristics of it are mixed terrain, more sort of like fields and things, but not crazy humidity. So I think that the varying nature of the footing is probably something that's going to work your lower legs. So that's something to be aware of. But I don't think that there's a ton of elevation gain, which is a good thing. So that's, how you would look at approaching a race like this one. And so this is something to be aware of is how you're going to approach a different race based on the different events. Birdies, it's apparently run in March. It's drier heat because it's in WA. Again, cooler at night. And it's got some different sections. It's got some runnable sections. It's got some swampy sections, which are a bit harder. And then it's got like a different stretch. So it's good for being able to, break into those different sections and kind of maybe focusing on pacing according to those sections. I think that the 2-2 tradition may have started here, but I think that this 2-2 tradition is something that's at all backyard ultras now. So lap 22, the 2-2, if you get that far, you have to bring a 2-2, which I haven't done. Both times I've got that far, so maybe I'll try and sort that out next time. Yeah. So those would be some of the challenges that you might face at the Birdies event. And then we've got Sydney. So this is, I think, a relatively newer one. Actually, I think it might have been running later in the year, not in April. Some of these races, I think they run twice a year, but I do feel like they ran it later in the year last year. It's again not too bad in terms of the conditions. So not as hot, maybe a bit of wind, probably not as much humidity because it's in New South Wales and at that time of year. It's a bit more easier running based on some of the terrain there compared to some of these other ones. So it's more of a front yard feel because of the location of it. So these are some of the strategies that you might look at in terms of preparing for that. But again, if it's runnable, that means you don't want to overrun it, right? So that would be something to think about. Herdies, this is probably one of the well-known Australian ones. So they have the front yard ultra, which I believe is in March, and then they've got the satellite champ. I don't think this is every year. I think it only happens every second year. But yeah, it's a drier heat in WA, which is good and cooler at night. So again, you want to plan for that. It's again an urban style, so a bit faster. So then the pacing becomes a strategy again, and the night running might be less interesting, so more mental fatigue there too. So things to be aware of. Toowoomba, I can definitely talk to because I've done Toowoomba. This is a newer one. I'm putting it in here because I was a big fan of it, and it's quite challenging because it's in October, so it's warming up on a hillier course. So there's a bit more fatigue that comes in, but a really interesting course. I found that it was really mentally engaging. So, I would recommend it for that because it's actually quite interesting and enjoyable. You've got your showgrounds, you've got the crit track, which is like runnable asphalt with a bit of undulation, and then you get into the fields going uphill, and then you get into some like nice little single track and downhill, and then you get into some paddocks that go around into some lakes, and then back to the showgrounds at the finish. So it's kind of a good variety, and it's just the one course. Some courses, particularly Glasshouse Standing this year, they have a night course as well. So you want to research the course format as well. And again, yeah, I think pacing and using the hills as walking sections is really important for something like Toowoomba, and being planned to how you're going to handle the heat, which I would recommend a lot of shade and, cooling strategies with water is really important too for that style of race when that heat is going to be an issue. So that would be Toowoomba. Glasshouse Standing, this is the one that I did most recently. So this is on the Sunshine Coast, and this was at New Year's Eve. So it's cool because it starts at 5 p.m. and, if you run 7 laps, then you run into New Year's. So then you've run 2 years because you've run from like 2024, for example, through to 2025. So that's a kind of a fun thing. I did find that the night start was mentally quite tough. So that's something that you might want to be aware of, is like if you're starting in the night, that mental challenge of going straight into the night without really getting warmed up to the format of the running and having people to talk to get you eased into it, that's quite tough. And you've also had a full day of being awake and getting ready for the race before you start running rather than having a night's sleep. So those would be, some pluses and minuses. We did switch to a road course through the night this time, which was like very nice and easy to run, but added like a bit more mental fatigue because there's less variety. So yeah, so there's some pluses and minuses to that. And I think a big part of this one for me was the humidity. It was really hot and humid pretty much the whole time. And so that really can take more out of you and be more energy sapping. So yeah, being aware of these different styles of races and what they have to offer and what challenges they may bring is really important. And people like to talk about these things. So if you do your research about the race format beforehand, you'll find people posting about it on YouTube or on social media, and you'll be able to ask questions unless it's the first time it's been run. It's always, for me, it's always about staying present and keeping control of your mindset. Like regardless of what run you're doing, those are probably the most important things to keep you going through the whole race. And, assuming you've got the basics of getting yourself physically going and keeping that nutrition going. So, yeah, as you can see, based on those quick summary of those 6 races, there's a lot of diversity between these different races, and your success depends on your planning for the specifics of the race you're going to do. So that's really, really valuable. So now I want to talk about how you can prepare physically and mentally to run a backyard ultra or any run, really, because that's why, as I keep talking about these things, they're a great training ground and proving ground for getting all of your running, processes, right. So that's what I think is so good about them. So, Personally, I haven't actually done a lot of like high volume training leading into the two that I've done. Maybe that sort of came back to bite me towards the end, and that's why my legs gave in early. Like I was probably averaging maybe just over 6 hours a week of running, which, for an ultra running event, that's not a lot. If I was training competitively for 100K, I'd be aiming for 10 hours a week, which I generally do. So yeah, that's actually low volume for me. But then again, it also depends on how far you're looking at running. But really, for a backyard, it's about efficiency and sustainability. It's not about pace, you know. But obviously, like if you can run faster, then you can maintain a slower speed for longer, which is positive. So you could do that. But mentally planning physically and mentally is really important. So really what I bring it down to is sort of three key areas. So firstly, it's running economy. So it's moving easily and efficiently. So it's being able to run with good rhythm, being able to be relaxed as you run, so you're not overusing any energy in any areas of your body that aren't needed, in particular, like in your upper body, holding any tension anywhere, and not like, yeah, not having any tension in your body is really about a good way to be more efficient, right? Keeping your core engaged will help you be more economical because, I compare it to a bouncy ball, right? If you think about a ball that it's only half inflated and you try and bounce it, it really doesn't bounce very well and you have to put a lot more energy into getting a bounce out of it, right? Whereas if you inflate it and you try and bounce it, it'll bounce really easily. And that's the difference between running with your core engaged and your core not engaged. If your core's on, you're going to get much more elastic recoil through your body than if you have no core engagement. So you're going to save energy basically. And then it's all about getting power from your glutes. That's where your propulsion comes from in running. Like your glutes are the biggest muscle in your body. And if you get propulsion from your glutes, then you're going to be able to run further because your glutes have more fatigue resistance than if you were getting propulsion, for example, from your calves or your quads, which I've seen a lot of people do. So yeah, you don't want to do that. You want to use propulsion from your glutes because they're going to last you the longest and be more economical. So that number one is getting your running economy right. Number two is your breathing. In my opinion, breathing is going to be really valuable. Like, okay, assuming that you've got all your logistical stuff sorted, which I've talked about, getting your breathing right is going to be really, really important because if you can control your breathing, then you can be more efficient with your oxygen, which means you can regulate your nervous system as well. You can keep your mind calmer and you can lower your heart rate. You can improve your digestion, and basically the whole body is going to be more efficient, right? So that I feel like breathing is the next step beyond technique. So once you get the basic technique right, you get the breathing right, then you're going to be much more efficient as a whole system. And the interesting thing about breathing is it's like the link between the physical and the mental, because if you control your breathing, you can help start controlling your mind and your thoughts because you feel more calm and in control. So breathing for me is a big part of running well. And when I'm talking about good breathing, it's about rhythmic breathing, deep breathing, using your diaphragm, and yeah, using like the full capacity of your lungs rather than what you would often see a lot of people do when they especially start getting tired is panting, like in the upper chest and go, because that is very ineffective and it will not get the oxygen you need through your body. And it also, creates more stress response. So that's actually something to be very aware of. And then we're going to talk about mental resilience, right? So that's probably very obvious. That's the obvious challenge in backyard ultras. You need to be mentally resilient to last the distance. But this is not just a backyard ultra thing again. It's an any run thing. Any time you want to run a long way and you're doing something you've never done before, you're trying to do better than you've ever done before, you've got to manage your mind, you know, and it's being able to be comfortable being uncomfortable, not having any certainty about how long you're going to be running for, and just being focused on the present moment. That's the skill set that's going to keep you running for a long time. And is it equally applicable if you're running 100K or 100 miles or 50K or a marathon? Being focused on that present moment and not thinking about what's to come is the most important thing. And the more you can have the presence of mind and the awareness of where you're focusing your mind and staying on that present moment and what you can control in that present moment, the better you're going to be able to perform. And hopefully the more you enjoy it, you know. So not having an attachment to the outcome is really important too, you know, because that's again like future thinking. It's like fortune telling. You know, there are all these labels for types of thinking that can be negative, you know? So those are, in my mind, are the biggest skills that you want in preparing for one of these events. So if you're looking at the big picture, it's not about more running, it's about running better, you know? Like more running is potentially not going to be beneficial. You know, training is only good if you get enough recovery. So you just don't run more and more because if your body's not used to it, you're not going to get enough recovery to benefit from it. So it's actually about training with good quality and improving the things that are actually going to improve your running efficiency and your running experience. Those things are going to have the biggest impact on the experience of the race and so on. So that's for me what I think is the most important in terms of getting the best out of these events. Yeah. And staying relaxed and staying, you know, calm and in control is going to be what's going to keep you going for the longest potential time. So that's the way I would approach it. So yeah, that's really kind of like how I would look at a backyard ultra. And then the next step for me is telling you how I help people do these things and what options there are for you. And so for me, these are the three things that I really like to focus on helping people with. I know Ian's on the call, and Ian's someone that I'm working with on this now as well. And I've actually been, yeah, really enjoying seeing people engage more with the process of running. So, you know, when we're talking about running, we want to really improve how we engage with the process. So I'm talking about your biomechanics, I'm talking about your breathing, and I'm talking about your mindset. Those are the three key skills that are going to change the game in terms of you enjoying running. And it doesn't take as long as you might think. You know, I guess one thing that I've been really doing is like trying to determine how do I make myself, you know, perform like a professional. I may not be a professional because I don't have the same skill. I don't have the same capacity in terms of like speed as a, you know, an elite Kenyan marathoner or, you know, Kilian Jornet, like the world's best ultra runner or anything like that. But I can still perform like a professional if I run with the highest degree of skill and I keep my mind focused on what I'm doing and I perform, you know, I get my nutrition to the best that I can and all of these things. So I can still perform like a professional. And my goal in terms of my what I do for pop running with the business that I'm running is to teach people those skills so that they can implement professional level techniques, even if they're not a professional runner, because that's what's going to get you the most enjoyment of running as well, you know? So that's what I'm doing. And I've been seeing like really good results helping people like implement like technique as a starting point and then breathing and then mindset. And so that's what I do. And so that's how I'm here to help if that's something that you think you can see as being valuable. So yeah, I do have an offer to get people started, and it's a 7-day running technique transformation. So this is a results-driven week of training where I will work with you to really transform your running technique to help you be more effective in running and getting the most out of yourself biomechanically. You know, we've all got the same musculoskeletal system. You know, we've all got feet, we've all got Achilles, calves, you know, hamstrings, quads, glutes, all the muscles around our core. You know, we're all built the same. And the reason that we're built that way is that biomechanically that works in a certain way. So, you know, but a lot of people, because of the way we live, move in a different way, you know, where a lot of us spend a lot of time sitting down, we spend a lot of time walking, and we come to running late. And so we only have one movement strategy, which is walking. And then we go, well, running, how do I do that? I'm just going to walk and put more effort in, you know? So that's what people end up doing. And so you're not using your glutes and you're not using your core and you're not propelling yourself efficiently. And you may end up overusing your quads, you may end up using your calves and all these different things. So that's what I do is help people really change that. And the way I'm doing this with my package is I do a 1 hour virtual session to teach you the running skill and key drills that are going to help you make this skill a habit. Because, I explain it's like learning to ride a bike. Initially, it feels really awkward and clunky, and it's only through repeated practice and building that neuromuscular connection that you're going to make it a habit. And so once you integrate this into your running, it will change your running forever. And so I teach you that first hands-on in a 1 hour session via Zoom. And then I deliver a 7-day training plan with drills and sessions to get you following that repetition and learning how to implement this. So, you know, you can run additionally to this, but the real goal is that you spend some focused time practicing because it's going to pay you back in spades long term. And that's via Final Surge where there's like an interactive ability for you to comment and me to, give you feedback as well. There's also obviously email as an option as well. And what I'm also offering as a bonus for this is access to my movement mastery library as well, where I've gone into a lot of depth on how to train yourself for better movement in terms of mobility and in terms of strength and focusing on the right things, because a lot of people, when they're focusing on strength, they're focusing on areas which everyone does, like squats and lunges and, big muscles. Even sometimes I see a lot of people trying to do leg press, for their quads. But like for me, it's about focusing on the small muscles, right? The ones that are actually going to keep you stable so you can generate power. Because all of us have got glute muscles, but most of us aren't using them. But you need stabilizing muscles in your feet and in your core and on the outsides and insides of your legs to keep yourself stable on a single leg so you can really transfer all the power from your glutes into the ground to keep you moving forward as economically as possible. So that's there as well. And I've got a few quick testimonials from other people that I'll share just to kind of give you some insights into how other people are experiencing this.
The technique, Sam, is huge. That's what I found. I find that like the way I was even running wasn't even right. Like even you were saying about the cadence, the cadence, like the steps, like all that, like your arm positioning, your body positioning, you know, hips, like how you move, like all that I've changed and implemented, and it just feels I can run at it in a real comfortable stride, and I feel great, and it's a huge difference. I never even knew that when it came to running. There's a way of running.
I won't continue with it, but you get the point. So that's one guy who I've been working with lately. And then I've also been working with some elites. So Tom Dade is a super well-known ultra runner. And I did a session with him. And yeah, this is his post on Instagram. He said that 6 years ago he had pain in his hamstring and hadn't run pain-free since then. And then, literally the day after I did a session with him, he had no pain. So that's pretty cool to be able to read that and hear that. Mick Marshall is another guy who I worked with who's an adaptive athlete, which means that his lower legs weren't working because he actually had an accident. And that means he has to have a brace around his ankles because his ankles don't work. So, but I did a session with him and taught him how to use his core and his glutes properly. And it was like massive difference for him. And literally the next day he went and knocked 5 minutes off his park run PB, which is amazing. So that's another awesome, bit of feedback. This one's really funny from Belle, who I did a session with last week. I just love the way she explains things. She said, I feel like you've turned me into a real runner. She said that she found herself during her glutes and she found like this hidden power had appeared and she was wondering why she wasn't feeling fatigued or sore when she was running and just couldn't believe it. So, I love hearing things like that. So that's, just me explaining I am having an impact on people with this work and I would love to be able to help you too. So if this sounds something that you'd be interested in doing and you want to get involved, this intro offer where you can do 7 days of training with me, including that 1 hour, is only 197 Australian. And it will save you a lot of time and effort in terms of having to overcome a lot of pain and niggles, which I know a lot of people do face with running. And it helps you, get around your backyard ultras faster and more easily. And so I would say it's well worth the time and effort. And if you want to get involved, then you can message me on Facebook, or you can just go to this link. So bit.ly/pop running transformation, all one word. And that's the sign up page there as well. So really that's my whole talk in terms of the backyard ultras. And do you have any questions? Since I think you're representing the audience at this point in time.
No, I don't think I've got any questions on that, Sam. It was a great introduction to backyard ultras for me, so I really appreciate it. It's got me
Yeah, and I know
excited.
you're looking at getting into ultras, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've just got to build my endurance before I tackle something like that, but got me really excited about it anyway, Sam.
Yeah, well, I think, do it sooner rather than later would be my recommendation, because you actually probably don't need as much endurance as you think. I think like if you can run 10K, comfortably, then, obviously depending on logistics and, whether it's worth the effort, you could probably still do 2 or 3 or even more laps, and you might find it's like a really cool experience, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it removes the pressure as well when you don't have that.
Yeah, that's the thing. And because you meet people, you meet other runners and you get to talking to them, and you'd be surprised about who else is doing it, like, and so that's what's also really motivating, is you get to meet other people who are also like, you know, maybe earlier on in their running journey too, and share, your experience, and like that's what's great about these events, especially for me, because when I'm running other events, I'm just like running hard and I don't really have time to sort of stop and chat to, especially newer runners. But when these types of events, there's no rush, so I can just talk to anybody. And so for me, I really enjoy that.
Exactly. I think I'm going to spend the next few weeks building up my barefoot running and building up the endurance, but just increasing the distance I'm actually running.
Yeah. Well, I hope that, the work that we're doing, with the technique, that you start to feel more confident with that, because I think that as you do, you will start to feel like it's actually not as hard as I thought it was.
So I know what you've been teaching me so far has been fantastic. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Yeah, well, keep me updated.